We usually have this nice, easy-going flows, and then, as many of us know, this dramatic spot at Taganic, sometimes you see much higher flows. Hopefully, okay, it's not advancing on my screen, but I'm just going with this screen over here. All right, so yes, we wanted to focus in on some of the past floods that we've had, where we see them, and then what goes on here in Tompkins County. And as many of us know, there were some floods in the 1930s in Trumansburg. I know the big flood in 35, and this is an article from 1937. And so we know that there's been a lot of impact in the downtown areas and also in the smaller communities as well. And here's an image from an article in the 80s that impacted Dryden. So these are all related to really flashy events, much like we are seeing more and more of. And there are predictions for more of these floods. And so here's an example from the Penn Yan in 2014, and so we've heard a lot about what happened with the flashy events there, and then also over in Seneca County in Lodi, and this is Seneca Lake, and from 2018. And we know, even from last year, here in 2021, it was just about a year ago now, there was a lot of flash flood advisory. So we see this in a lot of our streams locally, and even though there are some big events from the past, but we're predicted to have an increase in precipitation levels over the next decades to come. So, and these are not coming in this nice casual rain events. These are the big storms that might hit just a small localized area, and they might impact not just the stream near your yard, but just your own property. And so that's, we're going to hear from Maureen of her own property and how that was impacted, and Rob's going to explain some of what you can do during these flood events. And so the way we've prepared as the Tompkins County Planning Department and the community at large is we put out a hazard mitigation plan last year, just wrapped up, and we do this every decade. And it looks at a number of hazard profiles, and one of those being floods. And so we do a lot of research on what's happened in the past and what we might anticipate for the future. So the hazard mitigation plan addresses flooding, and it talks about flash floods, lakeshore flooding, and these other impacts, landslides that occur because of flooding that we see happening. And so just talk about some of the examples of flooding we see here. Many of us are familiar with the ice jams that are created in the creeks here in Ithaca. It's Cascadilla. There are a couple of good examples the last few winters of the ice breaking up and flowing into people's yards, but then also that groundwater table just comes up, and so people in downtown are very familiar with their basements getting wet from that. But then there's also infrastructure impacts. We see both on Cascadilla and Fall Creek where the ice gets close to the bridge levels, and that's a concern for transportation as well. In addition, we also have lake flooding. I don't know how many people were familiar with last year in about November. This is from a spot in Lansing, and this is a very detailed graphic, but what it shows is that we have very little control here in Ithaca and Tompkins County area on the lake levels. It's actually controlled by the Canal Corporation, and if you've ever heard Bill Capel give this talk on lake levels, the lake flooding in the last picture and the next one is this little blip that got above that minimum flood damage level, but it didn't get to the maximum or the major, and it didn't get to the 100-year flood event. So people are seeing impacts along the lakeshore with their, in this example, it's someone's dock went underwater, and just some of their infrastructure that people have along the lakeshore. So that's another thing. But again, we don't have a lot of control because we have blocks, and there's a whole system, and it really depends on what's going on in the Seneca River of how they can control that. And that's also this giant lake that's flowing out through this smaller outlet. So there's there's only so much that can be done there, but it is controlled in a way that they like draw the water levels down this time of year. And I know so people are interested in the FEMA floodplain maps that are finally being updated after quite a long time. And I just wanted to give a quick update on the timing of all of that. In February, earlier this year, there was a community outreach by FEMA, and so they collected comments from community officials, and now FEMA has provided responses to those comments. That went out to community officials, and so the next step, that'll be more part of the public, will be in winter, we'll be seeing the preliminary maps. So what does preliminary maps mean, and how can you participate in that? So they'll distribute the maps and the data to both community officials, so your local elected officials, and they'll be posted on FEMA's Flood Map Service Center, and then FEMA will hold both meetings with the community officials, and then also we'll have open houses for the general public. So we'll do our best to get that advertised and work with FEMA for that. And then there'll be a 90-day appeal period that people can provide data if map revisions are necessary. So that's just kind of the teaser. We're not in control of this process, FEMA is, but just so you are aware that that's coming up for this winter. And just there's my quick introduction to flooding in Tompkins County.